Hello and welcome to The Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we turn today's current affairs topics into clear exam-ready insights for UPSC. It's June 10th, 2026, and today's edition brings you two important analysis articles for your mains examination. First, legislative disruptions and the challenge they pose to parliamentary functioning, examining how repeated disruptions impact accountability, debate, and the quality of democratic governance in the country. Second, the new phase of India-Nepal relations. We will understand the evolving dynamics of connectivity, strategy, cooperation, and people-to-people ties in this context. To enrich your mains answer writing, we also bring you a dedicated mains value addition segment featuring key data points, committee recommendations, examples, reports, and case studies, which will help you write more analytical and well-substantiated answers. And as always, we will conclude with prelims pointers for your 2027 prelims examination. So let's begin. So starting with the very first article of the day, we have in front of us an article from the Hindu wherein we hear that our Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla is telling a room full of presiding officers who are essentially the speakers of their own respective state legislative councils or assemblies, right, about India's legislature disruption crisis. Now this is an age-old crisis which we see at our Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, or even at the state legislative assemblies or councils. So this is where we have to understand that India has already known about this issue for a long amount of time, but is facing various amount of hindrances to address that. So let us understand what is the issue and also what we have to do to address this thing. In the very beginning, firstly, for your prelims information, please know that the recent National Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Northern Zone 2 was held in Haryana, wherein we have our own Lok Sabha Speaker addressing the various speakers of the various northern Indian states, wherein he mainly focused on the rising instances of interruptions and disruptions, which is not only plaguing our parliament but also the state legislative assemblies, and that is why it is posing a serious risk to our democratic traditions, because at the end of the day, the various representatives, which we know by the name of MPs and MLAs, these reps actually represent us at the institutions such as legislative assemblies and the parliament, that is Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, because we do not have the time, to go to the parliament every day and to debate and frame laws and regulations, and that is why we have sent our representatives. But at the end of the day, what they are doing, they are involved in various unparliamentary activities. Unparliamentary activities like shouting slogans, storming the well of the house, walkouts, boycotting debates, and some things which I cannot even write here, such as giving slangs in a very ludicrous language, even throwing chappals at each other. These are actually common, right? Also, if you look at the parliamentary functioning in countries such as Bangladesh and Pakistan, it is very much expected there. But it is not expected when the same thing happens in our country, right? So that is why we all took 4 important resolutions which can also become way forward for your answer. Or if you are recommending some good suggestions, you can take the name of this conference and you can actually give the recommendations. Like, we have to eliminate deadlocks and disruptions. We have to give more research knowledge to the existing representatives such as MPs who actually debate on a new bill. For that person, he has to know or she has to know about what is the bill all about, what is the various sectors of the economy which that bill is affecting, or the social fabric of our country. For that, we need to do extensive research, right? So that is why right now they need more digital technology such as AI, machine learning, even some startups which aid the MPs and the MLAs, and even some interns which they can hire from various institutions and colleges. And at the end of the day, we are also talking about the increasing of the quota of the youth and women in our parliamentary democracy. So these are the various resolutions that we have taken yesterday. But as of now, when we address this issue that our speaker is talking about, that frequent disruptions affect our parliamentary productivity, this is where we have to learn the concept from the absolute basics. Firstly, when we hear the term "we the people," we instantly remember our preamble. And we also remember the thing that we studied in our polity, that the constitution and the entire political landscape of our country depends on us, that is the Indians, right? So that is why we have to understand we are the source of each and everything. And also that is why we need various laws, regulations, bills, etc., which come from our assemblies also, and the two houses of the parliament too. So that is why the amount of legislative work which is done in a session, such as the number of sittings. For example, according to Article 85, we have that the President of India should be summoning the two houses, right? And that is where we find that the gap between the two must not be more than 6 months. Also, Article 100 talks about the voting procedures of various bills. It also tells that, okay, there must be a minimum quorum for sitting, otherwise the house will be prorogated, right, or it will be adjourned. Also, we have the articles which pertain to the privileges power, that the members of the parliament and also the state legislative assemblies, they have the freedom of expression, so that they cannot be sued for their objections and the various statements that they give in the parliament itself or in the assemblies themselves, right. Also, we have the various provisions wherein we have joint sittings. Now, joint sittings are actually done to resolve the deadlock between the two houses. So what are all these articles pointing towards? We do not get the term known as parliamentary productivity in the constitution, but via various articles we see that the constitution itself wants our parliament to function properly via the minimum time gap between the sessions, how we should be voting, how should be various MPs protected for their freedom of speech and expression. So these are all the things that we have to keep in mind when we talk about the powers that are given to the parliament and the assemblies for giving their opinions, for not shouting and doing all these kind of things. For that also we have the rules of procedures of various houses, right? So our constitution directly, indirectly provides for maintaining healthy productivity. Now when we do a case study here, case study is not very old, but from the 17th Lok Sabha, we see that, for example, the very first Lok Sabha had an average of 135 days of sitting, right? The 80s, in the 1980s, this average went down. Past decade, the average went down even to 70. The 17th Lok Sabha, that is a Lok Sabha which existed from 2019 to 2024, on an average sat for only 55 days in a year. Just imagine. As of now, the present one is averaging at 61. It is slightly above, but nowhere close to the 135 days in a year we were sitting at the very first Lok Sabha session, right? Whereas compare the same with UK, they're sitting for around 150 to 170 days on an average in a year. US also sits around 165. So the overall productivity, if you can understand the number of sittings, the number of disruptions and everything taken into account, only 47%. Lok Sabha has functioned for 45%, Rajya Sabha functioned for 31% of its scheduled time. So based on the number of minutes or the hours or the days, the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha were actually supposed to sit and discuss and debate, we get an average of only 47%. So this is very low. Now, when we talk about the low time dedicated, the time is also coming at a cost. For example, according to various experts, the total cost is around 1.11 to 1.39 lakh per minute. That is the number of money that is wasted. 387 hours lost in the 17th Lok Sabha. That means we are staring at a cost of around 278 crores. Now you know what is this equivalent to? This is the budget of a government school building for a year. Just understand one thing. Also, on the other hand, if you see, for example, the areas which are marked in red show 0 to 30% productivity of a scheduled time. See, throughout the various months, right, throughout the various sessions, if you can see here, most of the regions that we see are in red. That means for most of the time, the Lok Sabha actually did not perform well. Also, the same is the case with Rajya Sabha. Now, when we talk about the question hour, if you see the trend here from 2019, right, the question hour is on a declining trend as of the report that we have of 2024. Also, no adjournment motions discussed in Lok Sabha in the last 10 years according to December 2024. Also, the private members, the private members, for example, the members who are not belonging to the ruling party or the members who are not ministers, they can bring in their own bill also, right? And that they can do for every Friday. Now, for example, if you can look into this data, the private members' bills, it has been zero in the last Lok Sabha term. Also, the private members' resolutions, it has been less. So this means that the non-ruling MPs or MLAs, they are not coming up with their own laws and regulations. So sometimes this private member business becomes very, very important, because the more number of private business that we have, or say the more number of private members who are bringing bills and resolutions, it reflects that the house is functioning well. Also, if you understand one critical thing, that there has been no deputy speaker since 2019. Just imagine one thing, that there is no deputy speaker, and that is where the main convention that the deputy speaker would come from the opposition, that is also ignored, right? Now, that is where we find that actually there are some challenges. So the disruption is eating into the schedule times. The committees which generally scrutinizes the bill, they do not see the bills being referred to them. For example, the winter session 2025 only saw 26% of the bills being referred to the committees. For example, there is one bill which was passed in only 20 to 30 minutes per house at the parliament. Just imagine, the bill is introduced, after 20 minutes that is passed without any discussion, where the main task of the committees is actually to hold discussions, to do more expert recommendations and various other things. So the committees are weak right now. Opposition complain that they do not get debate time. Now, if the opposition is not allowed to perform well, so the opposition itself is an institution. Now, if the opposition do not get time, for example, they will not be remembered in the public forum for a long amount of time, and also their efforts, their all amounts of instances that they do in the parliament, that also will not be recognized, right? And that is where, sometimes the government is also alleged to hide behind the various amount of legislations, and sometimes it is also alleged that the ruling government do not reveal the bills in the very first instance. So that is where they also do not get the information on time. Also, when we talk about the constitution and the amount of responsibility it has placed on the presiding officer, that is actually quite immense. For example, if the speaker will find that some remark is not constitutional, they can expunge it, right? They can tell it to remove it or see it under a different lens. Also, the suspension of members according to the rules of the Lok Sabha is allowed. The members also can be named for obstruction publicly. So these are all the things that are given with the speaker, but at the end of the day, the speakers are sometimes seen as not exercising their power well. Also, we have already discussed this, the technical support and the research support is sometimes which our MPs lack. They operate with minimal staff, and for example, some specialized law on, say, AI or on technology, sometimes they cannot comprehend that without some technological tool, without data analytics. So that is where they need that support. Also, when we talk about the number of criminals in the parliament, at the state legislative assemblies, everywhere, according to ADR, it is at 46% when we talk about the recent Lok Sabha. Also, 93% of them are crororepatis. Also, when we talk about the cross-party trust, that is the inter-party amount of trust, I need not say about that. We already know very well that our parties always fight against each other, right? They hardly collaborate, where the main task of the business advisory committee is to bring in harmony in the houses, but that is also not functioning properly. So these are the various issues that we have to keep in mind. Now, if you look at the global comparison, we will actually be very surprised to understand that UK, US already are ahead. Even Germany, Australia, they are way ahead. Not only in the number of sittings that they are doing, but also look at the number of bills they are recommending to the committees. For example, UK recommends 70%, US 80%, 90%, and Australia is at 65%. Now, you know why this is very important. Why we need to refer the bills to the committees? Because the committees scrutinize each and every detail. They find out the various defects. They they do various expert consultation, and that is why the bills are debated on a 360-degree basis. All round debate happens. But the bills which are not recommended to the committees, they directly are actually passed and they become law. And then after they become law, they face various issues in actual implementation in real life. That is why UK, US, Germany, they have a very strong committee system. In US there isn't something that is known as filibuster rules, right? And committee hearings are mandatory. Cross-party committees are there in Germany. Just imagine the amount of political culture that they are witnessing. So that is exactly why we need some reforms in the country as of now. Firstly, we can follow the UK model where the referral of the bills to the committees can be done on a mandatory level. And also, if actually we are passing various laws, those laws must be reviewed every 3 to 5 years in the parliament itself by the various committees, right? And that is why we need various dedicated subcommittees under various amount of departmentally standing committees. Also, we have to talk about giving these committees more power, because at the end of the day, to become more productive, to do less amount of shouting, sloganeering and everything, let us organize the various members of the parliament and the MLAs into various committees according to their expertise, right? And that is where they can actually debate on the various select DRSC or departmentary related standing committee reports, right? For example, the committees can also seek the individual ministers or the department heads recommendations or advices in a written format. The committee foundations recommendations, they must be published in regional languages with more amount of new interactive media such as infographic videos, etc. Right? Research staff should be given, data analysts should be given to the various amounts of committees, also to the private members. Technology, this is where it is very important to support that research, right? For example, AI, big data tools can nowadays audit various data. They can also give us insights according to the various budget session deliberations that we have. For example, one MP maybe cannot understand how much we are spending or we are earning in a particular year. So using data, tools and AI, we can actually have an evidence-based question for the MPs. For example, if that MP is from the opposition MP, so that MP can have some questions. Those questions can be based on this data and the audit which is given by the technology, because technology brings in transparency, transparency brings in trust. These are the various things which we have to keep in mind even for the GS4 answers, right? And at the end of the day, we have to make all the committee recommendations and the reports at the various public level. Now, what are the other actions that we have to take? We have to fix, for example, the number of days that the parliament or the legislations at the states should be sitting at a minimum of 100 days per year, minimum, right? Also, we must be fixing the question hour. Question hour is a very, very important scenario where the questions are being produced, but sometimes if this do not take place, then the MPs are not held accountable. Also, disruptions should be penalized. For example, salary cut for the MPs. Prime Minister's questions should be introduced, for example, like the UK model. Even, for example, strengthening the speaker's power and making the speaker a neutral person in real sense, right, should be encouraged. So these are all the steps that we have to take right now. At the end, please do solve this 2022 PYQ in the comments, a very conceptual one, and also attempt this question for your mains preparation ahead. So with this, we will now moving on to the next topic, where we will understand how India and Nepal are increasingly seeing a new critical neighborhood relationship, wherein there are some shoots of improvements, but on the other hand, there are still some worries. So in this one, we will try to understand from the very basics. Firstly, understand what happened. Recently, Nepal's Prime Minister, Mr. Balen Shah, we all know him from the Gen Z uprising. From September 8 to 9 in 2025, Nepal saw a very, very huge protest, because according to the Gen Z of Nepal, all the members of the parliament and their various legislations, they were corrupted. They were involved in nepotism, right? Their all of the democratic institutions, for example, say the various amounts of judiciary officials and the various other officials, they were all involved in various anti-national activities. The Gen Z also observed that the opportunities that they are getting in terms of economic opportunities is very, very low, because the economic condition of Nepal actually collapsed in recent times, particularly after the COVID pandemic. Because Nepal as a country relies usually on tourism, after which, the COVID pandemic, the tourism sector was hurt, and that is where only the powerful people actually captured more power. Inequality grew during this time, and that is exactly why the Gen Z rose in uprising, and that is where a rapper became a prime minister. And after that, he gradually did a lot of things, passed a lot of statements. But yeah, when we talk about the recent topic, we have to come back to his parliament speech. So he told in the Nepal parliament that what surprised me after becoming prime minister is that not only India is accused of encroaching Nepalese land. We will going to understand how Nepal accuses India of encroaching on their land. But most importantly, he told that in some places, Nepal may also be occupying territory claimed by India. Right? Now, a statement coming from a prime minister that our country has encroached some other country is a very huge thing. Particularly if for a long period of time, Nepal and India were involved in the land dispute, especially for the past few decades. Nepal has actually vehemently claimed that this entire region belongs to Nepal. So this is a very huge statement coming from the Prime Minister of the country. So this actually has been signaling that Nepal has not only just changed its government, but also changed its political generation, which has some radical new ideas to sort out some old issues. Now, what are those old issues? This old issue is actually concerning this area. Now, if you can actually notice, this is in the tri-junction of India, Nepal and China border, right? Where we have the Lipu Lake Pass in this region, correct? Now, what is the main bone of contention? It is the 1816 Treaty of Zojila. Now, we have also discussed this in the previous sessions. Almost all the border disputes that we have right now, right, in the country, between India and the various other countries, only one country is to blame, that is the UK. Because they did not specially demarcate various areas, and also before leaving our country, they did not care to clarify the various administrative stances. For example, just understand one thing. The Treaty of Zojila, which was signed after the Battle of Nepal, that is where the Anglo forces and the Nepalese forces actually fought for Nepal, and that is where in this treaty, Nepal's western boundary was fixed along the Kali River. But the main problem, is not Kali River. Kali River is there, it is mapped, everything is well documented. But Nepal tells that the source of the Kali River is actually Limpiadhura, right? So, if you see, the western Nepal border is here. Now, Nepal is telling that the source of the Kali River is Limpiadhura, and that is why this entire stretch of land which is encroaching on Uttarakhand belongs to Nepal itself, right? Now, India tells that according to this treaty, it is told that Kalapani and the Lipu Lake Pass region is actually the main border and the source of the river Kali, right? So this is the main contention where Nepal is trying to claim Limpiadhura as their western source, right? But India is telling that it is the Kalapani. So this is the main dispute. And also by 1879, a survey of India map clarified the river's origin, which placed Kalapani and Lipu Lake inside the British administered land back then. So right now we Indians are also claiming this, that the Kalapani to the Lipu Lake Pass is actually the main border, right? But the Nepali side is telling that it is the western border, that is where we find the Limpiadhura. Now this is the main content. Now not only this region, but also there is a region in Bihar, right, in the West Champaran district, where this Susta region is also contested. So this escalation timeline is not new, but it goes back to 1962 after the India-China war, where India started placing more troops in this area, in this entire area, because this is an India-China border also, right? So this is where we are placing more troops to prevent future Indo-China crisis, right? So this border we have to cover properly, and that is why in 2019 India included the entire region of Kalapani, Lipu Lake, Limpiadura, wherein we included the Darchula Lipu Lake road for better connectivity, mainly for the movement of our border forces alongside the India-China border. Now throughout this time, when Nepal was observing that India was actually having more border forces, also roads, that is where it took a very surprising move in 2020. It amended its constitution, included all these 3 regions in Nepal. It also issued a new currency of 100 rupees in 2025, including the new map of Nepal. Now this is a very surprising thing, because Nepal on itself, the previous government included this, which is actually against Indian sovereignty. In 2025, India and China decided to open Lipu Lake again, because Lipu Lake region was actually a very ancient route, a trading route between India and China. So that is why these 2 countries are right now agreeing to reopen this route. Now in this aspect, Nepal becomes very, very isolated, because throughout their existence, Nepal always have been sandwiched between the politics of India and China. It is, I admit, a very sorry state of affair for them. It is a landlocked country, very less in resources, and that is why they have to be dependent on the surrounding nations. But they always get trapped between the politics of these nations, right? And that is why, agreeable to some extent, they can have some issues in their understanding of the various decisions that India and China take, such as reopening the trade routes, reopening the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, which can go through Nepal also, right? So Nepal in the recent times have been very apprehensive of this kind of developments, and that is why, in 2026 May, Nepal sends diplomatic protest notes to both India and China for these kind of developments, right? Because Nepal sees in itself a strategic isolation, that they are trapped between the 2 countries, and at the end of the day their national interests do not become interest of India and China. This is what they wrote in the protests, right? And that is why, right now the Balen statement, the Balen Shah who gave the statement right now, is actually right now acknowledging the bilaterality. He told what? He told that if India has illegally encroached Nepal, then Nepal may also have illegally encroached India. So this is a statement of bilaterality. Now this is where this June 5th to June 7, 2026 visit comes to our mind, because the Nepal foreign minister met our foreign minister, wherein both of them passed various statements and various diplomatic vocabulary, such as productive, carries no old baggage, highest priority. So these are the words which have been used by them. Now why these words are very important? Because these are positive words. This signal that these 2 countries can come together and sort out the boundary dispute. For example, if you look at the India-Nepal border, right? So we have the states of UP, Uttarakhand, Bihar surrounding that, and various other states too, such as Sikkim and West Bengal. In your prelims, what they can ask you? They can ask you that what is the state which is sharing the highest border with Nepal. So please do understand this map very well, right? Apart from this, apart from using a very positive diplomatic language, India actually returned some artifacts and various digital health clinics in the context of the 2015 earthquake reconstruction that Nepal is still ongoing right now. Also, we have signed various deals to bring UPI to Nepal. On the other hand, when we talk about Nepal's economic interdependence on India, we have to understand based on the trade and the tourism, right? And also the number of Nepali workers in India. Nepal is actually dependent on India in these kind of aspects. Also, Indians have been the leading source of FDI in Nepal. Even India and China are actually one of the highest in Nepal. Now, when we talk about the various dams and the hydropower projects that are ongoing from Indian side in Nepal, we have around 83,000 megawatts of hydropower potential. So that is why a lot of investments are coming from India to Nepal. Also, if you understand, we have an 18,050 kilometer open border where generally we do not require any visa, we do not require any strict permissions, where we only need to show various government IDs and we can be allowed entry. So this is where we have this people to people connect, right? Because many families on the either side of the borders daily cross the borders itself, right? Because we have a roti to beti relationship between the two countries. Also, if you can understand, there is a huge amount of Gorkha regiment both in India and Nepal. So this army to army relationship is also very, very strong. In fact, one of the highest amount of cooperation that we see between these two countries. And at the end of the day, no one can ignore the pop culture, the Bollywood influence, the various amount of regional films of say West Bengal and Bihar that have in Nepal. But still there are some issues going forward. What are those issues? Firstly, Nepal recently also have told, apart from the statements that can make us happy, we have some statements such as that Nepal will treat India at par with other countries. That means we will get the same treatment that, for example, an other country from Latin America or Southeast Asia or North America will be getting. Now, do you think that this is rational? So in my opinion, they should be very careful in telling this that India is same as other countries, right? Also, the China card is there because China is planning a railway route from Lhasa to Kathmandu and various other towns and cities of Nepal. We also have the Nepal's proposed railway network under the Belt and Road Initiative, right? Which is a very, very concerning aspect for India too. Now the previous government has approved this project. It has to be seen whether the recent government will be continuing with this or not. Also, Nepal sometimes rejects that there should be no third party. For example, the UK or China to settle the dispute or the boundary dispute between India and Nepal. But there are some political circles which also tell that China or UK should be coming and resolving the dispute. You know, the biggest issue between third parties is that whenever we have some dispute between two friends, some other friend must not come and solve the dispute. It is better that we solve the dispute between the two friends itself, right? Because the other friend can have their own intentions, such as China, right? And at the end of the day, we have to understand this boundary dispute has been existing for more than 10 years now. Still now there has been zero progress. So this is a very big issue. And to sort out this issue, the author of this article is giving us 3 solutions. First solution is that, which is a very practical one, is what we are seeing right now. What we are seeing right now, that this boundary dispute is there at Kala Pani. Let that continue. Because, for example, the India-China conflict of 2020 at the Galwan Valley is still continuing, but still we are seeing that India and China are becoming close to each other in some economic aspects. So, India and Nepal can also do that, having boundary disputes but still coming economically closer, and later, say after 2 to 3 years of diplomatic negotiations, we can sort out the boundary dispute. Second option is that we can have joint development or shared administration. For example, in 2015, the India-Bangladesh enclave swap happened. In the comment section, you let me know why this is also very important for our constitution. Now, this was a very, very rare event where India and Bangladesh, they agreed to exchange the various areas between the two countries. Right? India and Nepal can also explore that. But according to the author, the best solution will be option number 3, which is army facilitated solution. Army facilitated solution, for example, the army to army relations that we have, for example, with reference to the Gorkha regiments, right? Or the Gorkha population, they can actually bring in some negotiations, some diplomacy. And this is where we can have some joint border patrols, some better border mechanisms. And this is where gradually this border dispute will be sorted out. So once we have done with this article, there is this question again for you. Please do attempt this before we move on to the mains value addition materials. The first article is from the Hindu, page number 14, where we are going to discuss about the global climate finance developments. Because recently, according to the United Nations framework on climate change, right, the 64th session took place where in Bonn, Germany, India has urged urgently for climate finance because the climate change is a very serious thing, and that is why we have India partnering with group of 77 countries and China, like-minded developing countries, and the basic bloc has Brazil, South Africa, India and China, where we are trying to fight for more funds to fight climate change, because the next COP31, which will be taking place in Turkey, will be a very, very important one for actually framing the climate finance architecture. Also, we have the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism, where our MSMEs and industries need to adapt to climate change and bring in better production facilities. That is why we have to talk about the climate change and how it will be financed. Firstly, let us discuss the sources. We have multilateral sources such as World Bank, IMF. We have the bilateral finance such as the big countries, the Western countries, the US, UK, the Western European countries. They also finance for climate change. At the end of the day, we have the private companies, even the banks, and finally the philanthropic finance organizations which participate, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. Now, what we have to keep in mind for our mains examination, that under the UNFCCC, we have 4 general climate finance architecture. Firstly, we have Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, Loss and Damage Fund, and Adaptation Funds. These are all the funds which we are trying to uniformly package into something that we know as new collective quantitative goal, or this is where we are trying to mobilize $1.3 trillion per year by 2035. So in your mains answers, you can actually code these kind of meetings and dialogues and demands by India. Now, in the next one, we are going to look into the status of micro loans in our country. Now, this will be very, very important for the topic of financial inclusion in your GS3 syllabus, where we have the topic of inclusive growth. So for inclusive growth, for example, we have various stakeholders such as farmers, migrant laborers, and also small scale industries such as MSMEs, and also the entrepreneurs who take micro loans. So this is where we find the microfinance institutions in the country. So according to a recent report, what we are seeing, that micro borrowers are those borrowers who have less than 2 crore loans. And the share of loans awaiting repayment as of April 2026 has risen for around 1.4%. That means according to the recent economic situation that we are facing, we see that we are not actually repaying the micro loans taken by the various vulnerable sections of the population. Right? So this is where we understand that the credit to micro industries constitute around 86% of the active loans in the micro, small, medium enterprises segment. So this MSME sector is accountable for most of the micro loans. And if they are not able to pay back, that means it is actually not good for the business of our country. Right? And that is where we can also quote some other extra data, such as 85% of the borrowers actually are women. They come from rural, semi-urban areas. Repayment rate is actually quite high at 97%, but in times of economic crisis such as the recent one which is going on due to high crude oil prices, inflation, right now we are seeing this repayment which is becoming very, very slower due to various global risks. So you can use this example in your mains answer if you are justifying the sorry state of our economy right now, or if you are giving the example as to how inclusive growth is happening in the country or not. Right? Now, we will moving on to the next one, where we have the topic of dark patterns. Now, dark patterns we have all seen. For example, whenever we go to some website, we see that hurry up, the cell is ending in this many minutes. So they gave you days, hours, and all those things which trick your human psychology, that you are in a sense of urgency. You have to purchase this device or t-shirt right now itself, because only 5 coupons are left. But to get that coupon, you have to sign up, for which you have to give your email ID, phone number, and all personal details, on which they will spam you later on. And mainly in social media nowadays, we see this kind of dark patterns everywhere. So much so, according to a recent report, it has been told that Indian consumers are losing estimated 25,000 crore to 28,000 crore annually due to such deceptive interface design on various our online marketplaces and various other social media aspects, right? So that is why we understand that 88% of India's 304 million online buyers lose around 78 to 87 rupees per month behind these hidden charges that are known as dark patterns. So in your GS4 answers, in your GS1 answers of society, even in your GS3 answers related to inclusive growth, even your answers related to cyberspace securities, some measures or issues which are happening in the country, you can code these kind of examples. And that is what is the beauty of this mains value addition materials, so that you will be filtering the content and using them directly in your mains answers, such as this one again. For example, this article in the Indian Express today, page number 13, is telling that the total fertility rate, we discussed this in the recent Analyst also. In the comment section, you let me know what is the recent rate or data of TFR for India as of now, according to the latest National Family Health Survey. Now, if you see, this is the world fertility rate, right? If you see, the world fertility rate is actually on a declining trend. The same is also the case for India. But India kind of have been above the world's fertility rate till around 2008. And after it, if you see, the TFR for India also has been going down. The replacement rate for India is 2.1, which was also discussed in the previous session. As of now, you see, we are below the replacement of 1.96. That means more women are having less than 2 children in the country. If you see the same state in India, mainly the northern states, if you see, are having higher TFR. Southern states have TFR less than 1.9. So this means that generally we find that the population in India is stabilizing, the demographics is stabilizing, and this is where we have to now focus on working age population, their skills, their education. So in the comment section again, you let me know, because it is mains season, you all must be knowing the skills and the educational skills and the schemes that we have taken as a country to empower our working age population. So this was the conclusion of the mains part. We will now start with the prelims pointers, where the first article of the day is actually on Zojila tunnel, because recently India achieved a significant engineering feat by completion the blasting of the tunnels. Now if you can look at the map, this is the road from Kargil to Srinagar, passing through Dras and Gandarbal. So between this region, we have 2 tunnels. Firstly, in this area where we have the Zojila pass, we are constructing the Zojila tunnel, and this is around 13.153 kilometers long. On the other hand, we also have the Z-More tunnel, expected to be around 6.5 kilometers long. Now, not only the Zojila tunnel is actually located at an extreme altitude of around 11,650 feet, but also throughout the year it sees snowfall, avalanches, and also sub-zero temperatures which can even drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius. So this means that around 6 months the highway is closed. So how will the tourists, or say mainly the security personnel, travel to these extremely sensitive areas? Also, one of the most important reasons why we have the tunnel right now is also to bring in good connectivity to the Ladakh region. So when this tunnel will be completed, this will be Asia's longest bi-directional tunnel, wherein cars, vehicles, military establishments can actually go to and fro. And also this will be the world's longest single tube bi-directional road tunnel too. So very important facts for your prelims. Now the new tunnel will be bringing down the commute time to 15 to 30 minutes, where earlier it would take around 30-kilometer drive, taking around 3.5 hours. It will be open throughout the year, zero avalanche risk inside the tunnel, right? And that is where this will be also built at a cost at 6,800 crore approximately. Now this is built by a private company, and this is actually one of the tunnels in a long list of tunnels. For example, we also have the Z-More tunnel that I have shown in the map also here. This is a region where the Z-More tunnel will be built just maybe a few kilometers from the Zojila tunnel. Also, We have the Shinkula tunnel, which is also in Ladakh's Zaskar Valley, which will be at the most highest level in the country when it will be completed at around 16,580 feet. 4.1 long kilometer. We also have the Atal tunnel, which has been completed, which is in operation right now, and as of now it is world's longest single tube tunnel highway above 10,000 feet. Also we have the Silkyara Barkot tunnel, where we have 4.5 kilometer bi-directional tunnel in the state of Uttarakhand, connecting the areas of Gangotri and Yamunotri. Also, if you can look into the more amount of border infrastructure that we are building, we have the Brahmaputra underwater tunnel under planning stages right now. Still construction and fully phased installation of the same has not been done. So we will see the latest developments on this also. But the infrastructure chain for the border areas, for the security of the same, is very important for our mains exam also upcoming and for the next year's prelims too. So now let us move on to the next article, where we see that the cockroach Jana Party is becoming very popular on the social media. Maybe some of you has also become a member of it. But did you ever wonder as to whether they can use cockroach as a political party symbol or not? This is where we will be focusing on, based on the symbols order of 1968 by Election Commission. Now, Election Commission actually has two parameters to give symbols. Firstly, we have the recognized national and the state parties. For example, to be designated as a national party, firstly you have to be a state party in at least 4 states, or simultaneously you can also do one thing. You can win 2% of the Lok Sabha seats, minimum 11 seats from at least 3 different states, or you can also secure 6% of the valid votes in 4 or more states plus 4 more Lok Sabha seats. So based on this right now, on the present political scenario right now, we only have 6 national parties, right? Now, can anyone let me know which are the 1 or 2 other parties which were recently de-recognized as national parties? Now, if you all know, BJP, Congress, Communist Party of India, Aam Aadmi Party and 2 others, right? They have their own symbols. They have their own symbols which is fixed, and they can use the symbols throughout the country. But there are some parties which are registered but unrecognized. Unrecognized means they are not national or state parties, right? And also some independent candidates. So for them, the Election Commission actually gives a list of free symbols. Symbols such as this. For example, an almirah, air condition, auto rickshaw, bat, belt, right? So these are the common use items, because most of the voters in the country can come from uneducated backgrounds, non or low literacy backgrounds, and that is why they have more familiarity with objects such as this one, which they use in maybe their day-to-day lives, but maybe not diamonds obviously. But definitely these are the most commonly known non-living objects, right? And this is where we see that the ECI published the latest revised list as of 2025, and generally we have household, kitchen, food items, even for example some living items such as jackfruit, grapes, toffees, common items such as balloon, but not living creatures, because in the 1980s and 1990s, when this rule was not there, for example back then the parties could use some living say motifs or symbols such as cockroaches or rats or other types of animals. But basically the Election Commission of India saw that there was a lot of animal cruelty which was associated with the use of symbols, such as using the animals for display during political processions and so on. That is why the Election Commission right now do not allow any animals to be used as election symbols. So Cockroach Janata Party, for example, when it will be going to the Election Commission of India, if ever it has electoral aspirations, it will seek to register itself, it will seek to have a symbol, then it has to change the symbol, right? Or maybe there can be some other arrangements that the AECI can also do. So we have to look into this, but as of present norms and regulations, this is not allowed. So now we will move on to the next one, where we are going to look at the recent data that we got from Chandrayaan 3 and how that is pointing towards a very ancient link between our Antarctic region and our moon's South Pole. So this is where we will look into the topic. Firstly, we know that Chandrayaan-3 had this Vikram lander, right, and also a Pragyan rover. So when they landed on the moon, right, on the south pole of the moon, we understand that this south pole of the moon is having so much of data and samples hidden within the moon's surface itself. So this is where, when we landed for the first time in the moon, right? For example, when we launched Chandrayaan-3, the site where the probe was intentionally crash landed was known as Jawahar Sthal. Next, during Chandrayaan-2, when we actually had an unintentional crashing, that site is known as Tiranga. Now, Chandrayaan-3 landing area is known as Shiv Shakti point. This is in the south pole of our moon. Now, when we understand more specifics here, firstly we have to understand what do you mean by lunar meteorites. Guys, when the moon was in a very early stage, it was a hot rock, right? It was a molten rock where mainly the heavy materials actually was at the core of the moon and the lighter metals and the materials was at the crust, just similar to the formation of our earth itself. But sometimes due to various conditions, there were some meteorites which struck the moon, and in one instance one meteorite struck the moon in such a way that it almost halved the moon, and the debris from that strike on the moon actually reached earth. And that is exactly one of the main sources how we find some of the lunar rocks or moon rocks having reached our earth itself. For example, in Antarctica, we have various areas where these are filled with moon's rocks, such as this one, right? And that is exactly what we are trying to study. Now, for example, say you are a very rich person and you want to buy a rock from the moon, but you are not legally allowed to buy the rock by going to the moon and taking back the rock. You are legally allowed to buy a moon's rock if that has landed on the earth. For example, say look at this product, right? It is $7,270. So if you have money, please go on and buy the rock, and if you want, you can show me also, because I really am interested into how these rocks look in real life, because these are actually of different types and different characteristics, right? And we have to also understand, out of the total meteorites that have struck our earth, only 1% or less than 1% has been recovered, right? That is around at 417 kg, and that is why it is so costly, right? But right now, when the Chandrayaan-3 data that we are getting from the Vikram lander, we are trying to analyze the data near the south pole of the moon, and we are using the instruments such as alpha particle X-ray spectrometer. So by using this, what we found? We found that there is this Antarctica meteorite such as this one, which is present due to the ancient collision of the moon with a meteorite, which led to a lot of debris hitting earth. So that debris we took, and the Chandrayaan-3 data we took from the south pole of the moon, that is here, approximately this location. So what are the similarities we find? We found that the aluminium oxide is actually having an exact match from the data that we get from the Chandrayaan-3 with the Antarctic meteorite. We also see the same for the iron and magnesium oxides, which also have the same exact match. The rock signature, for example, the moon rocks on the surface are actually quite soft, and sometimes the rocks also float, right? So these are known as FAN rocks. So the rocks and the data that we collected from the Chandrayaan-3 is also between the FAN and MG suite lithologies. MG suite lithology is nothing but the rocks which are inside the moon's crust, which are actually from the moon's mantle or lower crust. But during that ancient huge collision, sometimes these magnesium rich rock layers, which are generally inside, they come on the surface due to such meteor strikes, right? So this is also supporting the lunar magma ocean theory, which gives actually the theory how moon was formed. right? We discussed how moon was formed as a hot, dense magma, right, which over the years cooled down over a period of time, and that is why we see almost all of the surface of the moon covered in white materials, which is essentially nothing but magma. And this is also, for example, this data also from the Chandrayaan-3 proves that there was indeed in ancient times how a colossal, a very big asteroid struck the moon, and from that fragment it landed on our Antarctic Ocean. Just imagine this very fascinating viewpoint of our space, right? So I guess this was all for this one. Now we can move on to the last article, where we are going to understand the FCNR B deposit swap scheme recently, which RBI is thinking of implementing in the country. But if RBI recently has been thinking, definitely RBI has thought of it earlier when Raghuram Rajan was actually the governor of our RBI. So back then he told that this was a idiotic policy, but actually it rescued the rupee back then. So Raghuram Rajan himself told that it is a very powerful weapon to help the Indian rupee. So let us understand this in a very simple way. What happened back in 2013 was a currency crisis. So rupee was depreciating. Also we had some global issues. So due to which the Fed was increasing its interest rate. And you know, if the US Fed would increase the interest rate, so definitely all the investors will go to the US, and in India there would not be any kind of foreign capital. So India would wanted to always attract foreign capital, so it chose a very unique way. What happened? Imagine a simple scenario that there is an NRI, right, who will be saving in dollars at some Indian bank, maybe SBI for example. So SBI will be keeping the dollars safe, for example, say for 3 years, 4 years term, during which the SBI will also give interest rate to the NRI for saving the dollars in the bank. Now in the meantime, how SBI will be benefiting? SBI can use this dollar for various loan purposes, or for example, you already know, whenever some foreign currency is involved, RBI always is involved. So RBI can also use this dollar for around 3 to 4 years as their forex reserves too. So based on the recent crisis that we have right now, the Middle Eastern crisis, we have seen recently how rupee is depreciating severely, how RBI is losing its forex reserve severely. Right? So this means that we have to protect the economy. We have to protect the rupee depreciation. So in this plan, the RBI can allow the Indian banks to give FCNR banking deposit accounts to NRIs who will be keeping fixed term accounts with zero currency risk, because whenever the NRIs will be keeping money in dollars in SBI, they do not have to convert rupees into dollars. Their money will be kept as dollars, and the returns interest rate also will be calculated in dollars. That is why there is zero currency risk. On the other hand, the commercial bank has to manage the currency risk. The SBI, for example, has to seriously consider that if right now the dollar rate is 95, tomorrow it can be 100. So what will be the loss in this scenario for SBI when after 3 to 4 years SBI has to pay back the original dollar amount plus interest amount? So this is what the banks complained back then. So also back then Raghuram Rajan told the banks that okay, don't worry about the currency conversion, because whatever the rate of currency conversion would be after some rate, after some time, the RBI will be giving that money, that gap. So RBI will be hedging or giving a kind of a currency insurance policy that if the currency depreciates, it is RBI's responsibility to give back the money. Right? And this is exactly what we have to keep in mind, that back in 2013, due to the taper tantrums, RBI actually mobilized around 26 billion in foreign inflows, and this inflow means that more of the NRIs have kept dollars with our Indian banks, because you know there are so many NRIs with lots of money which can get higher interest in India. So similarly, we are expecting 40 to 50 billion dollars right now, right? And this is where RBI will be giving absolute protection in cases of any exchange rate risks, right? Plus some interest rate also, right? So this means that this idea, this idiotic idea, makes sense as of now. Because initially when Raghuram Rajan actually heard of this idea, he did not like it too much, because simply, it is very, very costly for the Indian government to spend the money on, for example, $125 million for every single billion of the dollars that would be deposited in these accounts. So we are spending around $125 million per $1 billion which can come in India by this route. But if this is expensive, why the RBI is doing this right now? Because firstly, it can bring in huge billions amount of dollars. Secondly, these are new dollars which can be used in our country for various purposes, for mostly RBI's foreign exchange reserves. Also, it can bring down the annual import bill, right, by actually appreciating the Indian rupee by around 3 to 4 rupees, which can bring down the cost of import, right? Because you know that whenever we have appreciation, the imports actually become cheaper. So imports will be becoming cheaper, and $1.6 trillion will be saved per year, right? So this means that actually if you are spending $125 million right now, this can lead to savings tomorrow, and this can address the current account deficit that we have. According to various experts such as Nomura, right, current account deficit actually can become as high as $70 billion without such things. Now, if we do this kind of swap mechanism, this can bring in more money for our capital account, right? And this is exactly how the government also has taken various other steps in the recent times, such as we also discussed in the previous analyst sessions, that the capital gains tax for the foreign investors in government bonds has been abolished. Withholding tax in government bonds for foreign investors also has been abolished. So this is a pattern that we are seeing, that we need more foreign investments to improve our balance of payments, right? And we can do all of this without actually increasing domestic interest rate, because we are not touching the interest rate at all, right? We are only talking about bringing dollars, and these dollars will be bringing more liquidity, more money in the country, and this will have more actually funds for the banking sector too, which can give more deposits, more loans in the future to stimulate the economy with reference to the crisis that we are facing right now due to Middle East. So I guess this for all for this one. I thank you all for being a very patient audience. Please do attempt the quiz which is following up till we meet again. All the best and best of luck. Thank you.